A man who couldn't name his trees had no business owning them. Elias Mabberry, Byron, Georgia. A 15-year-old black boy inherited a dying peach orchard in Georgia, and every man in the county had already agreed it was only a matter of time before it swallowed him whole. They were still laughing when the fruit came off the trees heavier and cleaner than anything the county had seen in 20 years, but what would it cost him to get there? The joke started at Fulton's Feed and Seed on a Tuesday morning, the way most things in Byron started, between men with nowhere immediate to be. Clyde Purvis was leaning against the counter when he said it, loud enough for the whole room. "You hear the widow Mabberry's put that boy in charge of the operation? 15 years old. Elias barely cold, and she's got the child out there walking the rows like he's going to figure out what Elias spent 40 years learning." He shook his head with the slow sorrow of a man deeply unconcerned. "Be a shame when she has to sell. But it'll be a shame in about 6 months." The men laughed. It was an easy laugh, the kind that costs nothing because it lands on something that isn't in the room. James Mabberry did not hear the joke. He was already in the orchard. He moved through the third row at the pace his father had taught him, slower than any grown man around him had the patience for. His father had called it looking speed. Not walking, not inspecting, but the particular gear of attention that let the orchard tell you things. Most men rushed through rows because they knew what they were looking for. Elias Mabberry had taught his son to move slow enough to be surprised. James stopped at a tree in the middle of the row and pressed his palm flat against the bark on the southwest face. Not gripping, just resting. The east side was rough and cool and carried the good dry chill of wood that had slept through winter correctly. The southwest side was something else. Not soft exactly, but not right. He pulled the notebook from his back pocket. Green, worn at the corners, the spiral bent from being jammed in and pulled out 1,000 times. His handwriting inside it looked like his father's. Same careful block letters, same habit of dating every entry, same tendency to underline the thing he didn't understand yet. March 4th, 1961. Row 3, tree 19. Southwest face. Bark texture different from east side. Same feeling on tree 12 2 days ago. Checking all rows. He wrote it and moved to tree 20. His father had crouched beside him at a red Evan peach when James was 9 and pressed the boy's hand flat against the trunk and said, "Feel that. The tree is telling you something. It's your job to find out what it's saying before it runs out of ways to say it." James had pressed his palm against bark until he could feel the difference between alive and struggling the way you feel a fever in someone's forehead. That memory lived behind his sternum. He reached for it the way he reached for the notebook, automatically, as the thing that kept him calibrated when everything around him was trying to throw him off. Ed Sutter found him in the south row a week later, notebook out, moving tree by tree. "Boy, what are you doing?" "Checking the southwest bark. There's a pattern I'm trying to understand." Sutter looked at him the way a man looks at something that doesn't fit the shape he's already decided it is. A man with 40 years in peaches can walk a row and tell you everything you need in 20 minutes. "What you're doing out here with that little book?" He didn't finish. The pause finished it for him. James looked at him with the steady attention of someone who had decided that explaining himself to men like Sutter was work that wouldn't pay. "I'll be out here another hour if you want to look at the bark on tree 12. Sutter drove away without looking at tree 12. James wrote it down. The men came to the porch on a Friday. Clyde Purvis, his brother Dwight, and Vernon Aldridge, who ran the biggest peach operation in Crawford County and had opinions about everything smaller than his. They talked around James the way men talk around furniture. He was sitting on the steps, cleaning a pruning knife. They did not lower their voices. "She can't carry it alone," Vernon said. Elias was the operation. Without him, what she got is 43 acres and a boy. "Boy's out there every morning with a notebook," Dwight said. "Like writing things down grows peaches." Clyde laughed low. Elias left him a hat and a farm. He pulled on the hat. "Don't know yet that wearing it doesn't make you the man who owned it." Vernon said she ought to sell before the season made the decision for her. He said it the way you say weather, not with cruelty exactly, but with the indifference of a man who has never once considered that the boy on the steps might hear him, might understand him, might be building something from the sound of exactly this. James put the knife down and went inside. His mother looked at his face and knew the particular silence it carried because she had worn it herself. She put her hand on his shoulder. He didn't cry. He went back out to the orchard at first light. March 17, 1961, counted 31 trees with the southwest bark feeling, all on the same side. East bark fine on every one. No exceptions. This is not random. Something did this. Something keeps doing it. I don't know what it is yet, but I know it is one thing. The hat his father left him was on a hook by the back door. James put it on every morning and took it off every evening. Not to perform anything, because the weight of it on his head was the clearest reminder he had of the standard he was trying to reach, and because some mornings the standard was the only thing in the county that believed he might. Stay with this story, because the moment this boy finds out he's only half right, everything gets harder, colder, and more costly than anyone warned him. Subscribe now and don't move, because what's coming next is something no one in that county ever saw coming. The extension bulletins were spread across the kitchen table under the lamp at 11 o'clock at night. James moved his finger under each line the way his teacher had told him not to do, but his teacher wasn't here, and the finger helped. Physiological disorders in stone fruit. Cambium damage attributed to freeze-thaw cycling. Winter sun scald in Prunus persica. The language was dense and Latin in places, but James had learned you didn't need to understand every word in a sentence to understand what the sentence was trying to say. He wrote 4 drafts of the letter before he got it right. The first was too long. The second explained too much about himself. A letter from a 15-year-old black boy in Byron, Georgia, asking a college professor about peach trees needed to earn its way past the envelope. And the way to do that was to lead with what he'd observed, not with who he was. He described the pattern precisely. 31 trees, 11 rows, all damage on the southwest face, none on the east. Affected trees, otherwise healthy. He drew a small diagram. He wrote the first entry date and the most recent. He signed it James Elias Mabberry, using his father's middle name for the first time in writing, granting himself the weight of the name that had earned 40 years of respect in this county. He walked to the mailbox before school and lifted the flag and told himself plainly, a grown college man had no reason to write back to a boy about a few dead trees. He checked every afternoon for 3 weeks. The letter came on a Tuesday. He read it kneeling in the dirt of row 7. Dr. Ambrose Teague had written 2 pages in plain language, as if he'd understood from James's letter exactly what kind of reader he was writing to. Winter sun scald. The mechanism, once James read it, felt inevitable, the way true things always feel once you finally hear them. Late winter sun warmed the southwest face of the trunk, waking the cambium tissue from dormancy while the rest of the tree slept. Then the temperature dropped overnight, and the woken tissue froze. The east face stayed asleep through the cold and came out of winter intact. The southwest face had been waking and freezing for years, slowly dying while the trees looked fine from 20 feet away. The solution, white latex paint on the lower trunk and scaffold limbs, cut 50-50 with water for young trees. Full strength for mature trunks. Southwest face first and most thoroughly. Reapply before January each year. The last paragraph James read 3 times. Your observations are both accurate and uncommonly thorough. You have identified something that experienced growers regularly miss. You are seeing your orchard more clearly than most men twice your age. Do not let anyone talk you out of your own 2 eyes. 2 days later, James stood in the front hall with the receiver pressed to his ear and the notebook open on the table beside the phone. Dr. Teague's voice was measured and specific. He asked questions, and James answered them from the notebook. How deep does your February cold get? 14 degrees at the worst this year. And the warm spells before that? 4 days in late January, around 48. Sunny days, that's your killing window. 4 sunny days at 48 brings the cambium up. Then 14 catches it awake. A pause. You documented the January warm spell? Yes, sir, good. That's the piece most growers never connect. They're watching when the trees fail in spring and calling it disease. You're not calling it disease. No, sir. Every tree the same side. Disease is random. That's the tell exactly. Near the end of the call, the doctor said, "You didn't find this by accident. You found it because you went slow when everyone around you goes fast. Don't let anyone make that small." James thanked him and hung up and stood with his hand still on the receiver. Somewhere a man he had never met had spoken to him for 32 minutes, like his mind was worth the long-distance charge. The man at the farm supply store asked what he needed the paint for. "The trees," James said. "Which trees?" "All of them." The man looked at him the way the whole county had been looking at him since March. Then he got the paint. James paid and left without explaining himself to anyone. He started before sunup on the first morning, cutting the paint 50-50 in a bucket for young trees and starting on row 1. The brush went on in slow overlapping strokes, base of the trunk up to the first scaffold limb, southwest quarter first, then around. White against rough brown bark. In the cold early light, it looked like snow. He didn't talk. He didn't explain. He simply worked. The extension agent came on a Wednesday with his clipboard. He walked a row, looked at the painted trunks, and said he'd been servicing this county for 11 years and had never had a grower come to him with this complaint. "I know," James said. "That's part of why it kept happening." The agent suggested fertilizer. James said fertilizer wouldn't fix sun scald, that the fertilizer program was fine, that this was a different problem. The agent drove away with his 11 years, and James went back to the brush. May 24th, 1961, extension agent came today. Did not look at the southwest face of a single tree. I think he did not ask what Dr. Teague said because he did not want the answer to be right. The blossoms came on schedule the following March, pink clouds opening row by row, white trunks beneath them bright against the brown field. The fruit set heavy and clean through summer. The packer at Fort Valley noted it was the cleanest fruit from the Mabberry place in years. The county bulletin mentioned a 12-acre operation in Crawford County that had cut winter losses to near nothing. It gave no name. Everyone in Byron knew the place it meant. No one said so out loud. His mother sat on the porch in the evenings without the particular set of her jaw that had been there since Elias died. That was the clearest measure James had. But he wrote the night the season ended, August 30th, 1962, one clean harvest. This proves the paint worked against a normal winter. It does not prove the problem is solved. The real test is a winter that isn't normal. I am not going to call this finished yet. December came in warm. James felt at first as wrongness, the particular discomfort of something that should be cold and isn't. Temperatures sat in the high 40s through Christmas and into January. The air smelled like it was thinking about spring. He walked the rows on the second day of January and found what he had feared, but not yet let himself name. The buds were swelling. He went tree by tree, pressing buds between two fingers to feel the give. He checked the full south block and then the north. He wrote the date and temperature and the number of trees showing early movement. And when he got back to the house, it was dark, and his mother said nothing, because she could see from his face what the notebook contained. January 3rd, 1963, the cambium is waking up early. The warm spell has lasted 18 days. The buds don't know it isn't spring. If the temperature drops hard before they go back to sleep, I am going to lose trees. The paint reflects the sun. It cannot tell a 50-degree night from an April night. The paint only works when the cold is the guard. If the warmth gets there first, the paint is not enough. He stared at that last line for a long time. Then he wrote under it, I solved half the problem. I don't know yet what the other half is. The front came down on January 9th, 34 degrees to 22 in 2 hours. By morning it was 9 above and holding. He checked the trees at first light each day with his thumb pressed flat against the bark, feeling for the soft give that meant the tissue underneath had died in the night. First morning, firm. Second morning, firm. Third morning, one soft spot on a young tree in the south row. He wrote the number down with a steady hand. The fourth morning he found tree 47, his father's tree. The Big Alberta planted the year James was born. There was a photograph of it taped to the inside cover of his notebook. Elias Mabberry standing beside it, hand on the bark, the expression of a man who knows he has made something worth making. The bark on the southwest face went soft under James's thumb 8 inches up from the soil line. He pressed and felt it yield and knew. He stood with his bare hand flat against that trunk for a long time. He did not reach for the notebook. He just stood there in the killing cold with his palm against his father's tree, against the failure of his own incomplete answer. When he finally wrote, he wrote one line, January 13th, 1963, tree 47. Cambium dead. The paint held against the sun. It could not hold against cold-reaching wood that was already awake. I was half right. Being half right is its own kind of wrong. The story reached the diner changed and simplified. The Mabberry boy had painted the trees white. And now, he was out in the worst cold of the year, wrapping them in burlap like he was dressing wounds. The boy had cracked, people said, driven mad by isolation and failure. James heard it secondhand and let it go, because the cold didn't care what the diner said. But the doubt got in anyway. He sat at the kitchen table one evening, his hands too stiff to hold a pencil, and let himself think the thing he hadn't let himself think out loud. Maybe they were right. Maybe a boy his age had no business betting his dead father's orchard on a letter and a hunch. He sat with that for a long while. Then he thought about 31 trees in the notebook. All the same side. Every one. He thought about Dr. Teague's voice saying, "You didn't find this by accident." The seeing was real, even if the saving wasn't finished. He went to bed and got up before light and went back out to the trees. His mother found him at the end of a brutal day, his hands barely closing, and said his father would not have wanted him to freeze himself half to death over a row of trees. James said quietly, "Daddy lost 11 trees because he wouldn't go out in the cold and look at why. I'm not going to lose the rest because I wouldn't either." His mother had no answer to that. She put her hand on his shoulder. He went back to the work. He wrapped 210 trees himself through the worst cold of that January, on his knees in the dark, not knowing if the burlap would hold. Waiting out the cold without knowing whether he'd saved the orchard or just wrapped it warm for its own funeral. Tree 47 leafed out thin. James watched it through March without writing anything about it in the notebook. The first time he had withheld a thing from it deliberately. He watched the other trees push out blossoms on schedule, while 47 produced a scant dozen leaves and nothing else. He watched the bark above the damaged site crack and separate through June and July. He walked past it every day without pulling the cord on the saw. He went out the morning of August 14th with the saw and his father's hat. He stood in front of that tree for a long time. Elias Mabberry had planted it the year James was born. It had outlasted its planter. It had not outlasted James's incomplete answer. He pulled the cord. The cut was clean and quick, the way you want a hard thing done. That night he took the photograph off the inside cover of his notebook, Elias standing beside tree 47 in full bloom. He held it over the kitchen trash for one full breath. Then he put it back. He taped it in the same corner and wrote beneath it in the smallest lettering in the notebook, August 14th, 1963, tree 47. Cut and cleared. This photograph stays because the tree taught me the most. Being half right is its own kind of wrong, and the only cure is to stay in the orchard until you understand which kind of wrong you are and correct it. I will not throw out the record of what I missed. The burlap and the paint together held. The 7 trees Roy Holt had told him to cut and burn pushed out hard, vigorous new growth in the spring of 1964, the tight green kind that means a tree is taking back ground it had been losing. James documented every one. The harvest that summer came in ahead of anything the orchard had produced since his father was alive. The packer at Fort Valley moved the Mabberry fruit to a higher tier without being asked. The premium held in 1965. It held in 1966. James painted every trunk each March and wrapped every trunk each January. The work became part of him the way breathing is part of a man, not a thought, just a fact of the season. Vernon Aldridge drove up the lane during the harvest of 1966. He was 61 years old, had run the biggest peach operation in Crawford County for 30 years, and had said at Fulton's Feed and Seed in March of 1961, in front of enough men that it had become a fixed point in the local record, that the paint wouldn't grow peaches. He stood at the end of the row, watching James fill a canvas bag, climb down, and pour the fruit gentle into the crate the way his father had taught him. When James turned, Vernon was standing there with his hat in his hands. "Is it a specific brand?" Vernon said, "or does that part not matter?" James set the bag down. He looked at Vernon Aldridge, not with triumph, not with the satisfaction he'd imagined in the kitchen at 9 above zero, just with the steadiness of a man who has moved past needing a particular response from any particular person. Any white latex will do the job. Cut it half with water the first year while the bark's still young. Full strength on mature trunks. Vernon nodded. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small notebook. Same green cover. Same spiral wire as the one James had carried since he was 15. The kind that cost 30 cents at the Byron 5 and dime. He opened it and wrote what James had said. James watched a man who had discussed his future in front of him like furniture take notes from him in the August heat, and understood that he had not been waiting for an apology. He had been waiting for the peaches to come off clean and heavy. They did, row by row, all the way to the end of the day. Vernon closed his notebook. Your daddy would have been proud of this fruit. He put his hat back on and drove down the lane. James picked up the canvas bag and went back up the ladder. The men who had laughed loudest started coming out 1 and 2 at a time over the years. Hats in their hands at the end of the lane, asking a black man who had been 15 and a joke to teach them what their own fathers never had. James told every one of them the same thing. It wasn't the paint. The paint was just what you did after you stopped guessing. The real work was going out in the cold to find what was actually killing the trees, going slow enough, looking close enough to see the thing that looked like nothing until you understood what you were looking at. Margaret Mabberry was asked once what she considered the most valuable thing on the place. She said, box of notebooks in the back bedroom, tied with twine. Not the orchard itself. The orchard was what the notebooks built, not because every decision in them was right. Half of them recorded him being wrong. 11 trees lost before he understood the full problem. Tree 47 with the date of its death in his own hand. Then why keep those? The interviewer asked. Because not one wrong decision in those books stands alone, Margaret said. Every wrong decision has a correction written under it. That's what kept a 15-year-old boy from losing his father's farm. Not the right decisions. The corrections. The county spent one spring laughing at a boy with a notebook and a brush. It spent the next 40 years painting its own trees white, and not one of those men ever said his name out loud while he did it. They didn't need to. The proof was hanging on 210 white trunks, right against the brown Georgia fields, doing exactly what the boy said it would. He was not smarter than the men who laughed at him. He had no more land, no more money, no more years. He had one thing they didn't. He was willing to look at the problem honestly, even when the answer made him look foolish. Even when the whole county had already decided a boy like him couldn't possibly be the one who was right. And he was willing to keep looking after he found out he was only half right. That was the harder discipline. Somewhere in that county, there is probably a person everybody's already written off. Too young, too quiet, too far outside the room where decisions get made. And every so often, that's the exact person seeing the thing everyone else is too proud to look at. The trees don't care who's right. They only care whether you're willing to go find out.